Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee and do powerfully command thee, O Spirit. Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee and do powerfully command.
In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Welcome, friend. This is the Abracast, and I'm your host, John Towers. Today's episode is brought to you by the Seven of Coins Inverted. We're continuing our talk about this great book called The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. A second look at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve once again made giant news headlines. Probably at the time of this publishing a few days ago by raising, you know what I'm talking about. So, and it's funny because as we started this book because I was like, I don't know enough about the Federal Reserve, and I feel like I've learned a lot. I don't know if you agree with that, but I feel like I've learned a lot. And I was listening to some pundit today talk about it, and he was like, the Fed's doing everything they can to combat this inflation. And I just keep thinking back to the creature from Jekyll Island, and I'm like, they caused it. They always cause it. See the boom bust cycle. And so now, the Fed is being talked about for heroically struggling against the inflation that they caused. So it's enough just to be like, wah, the fucking, sad trombone sound. Wah, 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 like you just lost on Let's Make a Deal or whatever that shitty game show was. So I thought that this was going to be the last episode, but there's a lot of reading that I've got to do here from here on out, and we might spill over just a little bit. But I'm going to do my best. I'm rushing through all this shit so we can cover as much ground as we can. So check out Abracast.com. Check out the feature topic link. These when we talk about conspiracies, this is the kind of shit that we talk about. We don't need to talk about maritime law. We don't need to talk about the moon being a hologram or something. We don't need to talk about secret space programs and how Obama was an astronaut that was teleported to Mars in the 1983, because this is the real shit. And a lot of this I file under media. The media gives them coverage to do all of this stuff. Think about if any other the shoes on the other foot game, right? And you get the president out there going, I don't want to hear no more about how inflation's caused by reckless spending. That's a lie. No joke, man. For real. Here's the deal. It's caused by Putin. Everybody knows. Putin, 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 Putin. I have my vessel of the art chock full, well, it was, to the brim with my weapon of mass distraction. It's a formula for a weapon of mass distraction. There's two kinds of weapons you can make with a bottle of gin. 3, you could smash it and stab somebody. Everybody knows that. Or you can turn it into a Molotov cocktail. You can do that too. Or you could just pour it down my throat. And this is what happens. The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. A second look at the Federal Reserve. Section 4. Time travel into the future. So as the great filmmaker Oliver Stone would steal in a quote, the past is prologue. So everything that we talked about before was in the past. And here, Griffin starts talking about what we're going to see in the future. And this book was written in 1995. So let's see how it stacks up. In the previous sections of this book, we've traveled through time. We began our journey by stepping into the past. As we crisscrossed the centuries, we observed wars, treachery, profiteering, and political deception. That has brought us to the present. Now, we are prepared to ride out our time machine into the future. Do, do, do. Ba, 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 bow. It will be a hair-raising trip, and much of what lies ahead will be unpleasant, but it has not yet come to pass. It is merely a projection of present forces. If we do not like what we see, we still have an opportunity to change those forces. The future will be what we choose to make it. Wrong. The decline of American prosperity, the increase of the size of government, and the decrease of personal freedom. The growth of taxes, evidence that this is according to plan by an elite ruling group which hopes to merge the United States into world government on the basis of equality. With less developed nations, the environmentalist movement shown to be an outgrowth of this plan. That's enough of history for one book. It will soon be time to reset the coordinates of our time machine and jump into the future. Before activating the switch, however, let's take one last look around us. The future is molded by the present. We are now, where we are now will greatly affect where we are going to be. One of the most obvious characteristics of our present time is the extent to which Americans and their government have been mired in debt. Annual federal deficits have grown steadily since 1950, and the rate of growth is now in a vertical climb. It had taken 198 years for the federal government to borrow the first $1 trillion. Then, in just 12 years, mostly under Ronald Reagan, it borrowed another $3 trillion. By the end of 1993, after just 1 year of the Clinton administration, the debt had grown to about $5 trillion. This is hilarious. It's difficult to comprehend the numbers of that size or to translate them into their general effect upon each of us. 5 trillion represents about 80% of all the goods sold and all the services rendered in America throughout the entire year. If you had a stack of $100 bills 40 inches high, you would be a millionaire. 5 trillion would rise up 3,350 miles into fucking outer space. So it's also, we should also point out, and this isn't a left-right thing. Presidents just like to fucking spend money like drunken sailors. Obama, the debt under Obama equaled the amount of debt of every single president in history. Just this one dude. So that's amazing. By 1993, net interest payments on that debt were running $214 billion per year. That's just the interest. net interest payments on that debt were running $214 billion a year. I wonder where we're at now. I wonder if we pay any of our debt down other than interest right now. I bet you we don't. I bet you all the taxes that they take just goes to interest payments on debt. I am not a money person. Statistics is not my strong point. Obviously, economics is also not my strong point, which is why we had to do this book, right? Anyhow, $214 billion per year. That consumed about 14% of all federal revenue. Now it represents the government's largest single expense, greater than defense, larger than the combined costs of the departments of agriculture, of education, the departments of energy, housing and urban development, interior, justice, labor, state, transportation, and Veterans Affairs. These interest charges are not paid by the government. They are paid by who? Us, you, me, everybody, taxpayers. You provide the money through taxes and the secret tax, inflation. That's why we've been talking about this. The cost currently is about $4,500 for each family of four. All families pay through inflation, but not all pay taxes. The cost of each tax-paying family, therefore, is higher. On average, over $5,000 is extracted from your family each year, not to provide government services or even to pay off previous debts, and nothing is produced by it, not even roads or government buildings. No welfare or medical benefits come out of it. No salaries are paid. The nation's standard of living is not raised by it. It does nothing except pay interest. So for a the majority of my life has been lived under the poverty line. I've been broke. That's it. When I see someone panhandling on the street saying I have $0, I'm like, oh, that's quaint. Anyhow, this is paying your minimum payments on your credit cards. This is paying the $25 a month, and they just keep stringing you along. Where was I? Ranting. That's where I was. Furthermore, of interest is compounded, which means even the government were able to completely stop its deficit. I'm a starving artist, bro. That's the way it used to be. Deficit spending, the total debt would continue to grow as a result of interest on the portions that already exist. In 1992, interest on the national debt was already consuming 57% of all revenue collected by income tax. At the present rate of expansion, it will consume 85% by the year 1995 and 100% in 1998, and that includes corporate taxes. Interest will consume 100% of our personal income taxes much sooner. He's got a footnote here. I haven't been paying attention to the footnotes, but this one is C. Harry Figge Jr. Bankruptcy 1995, The Coming Collapse of America and How to Stop It. Published by Boston Little Brown Company 1992, pages 24 and 68. Amazing, isn't it? Without interest on the national debt, we would save enough to reduce corporate taxes and eliminate personal income taxes altogether. Unfortunately, under the present policies and programs, that is not going to happen because Congress does not live within its income. Many expenses are paid, not from taxes, but from selling government bonds and going deeper into debt every year. So even though we could save enough money to eliminate personal income taxes, it would not be enough. The government would still go into the red and keep up its present lifestyle. However, if a reduction in the size and the scope of the bureaucracy were accomplished at the same time, then personal and corporate income taxes could be entirely eliminated, and the government would have an annual surplus. Take that in. Sit with it. Let it stew. Skipping ahead. Who owns the national debt? It has been said that we need not worry about interest on the national debt because we owe it to ourselves. Well, let's take a look at who owes what to whom. It may come as a surprise to learn that the Federal Reserve holds but a small portion of the national debt, about 7%. Foreign investors own approximately 12%, and other agencies of federal governments have 25%. The IOUs that replace money is taken from the funds. Private sector investors in the U.S. hold the largest share of about 56%. It is partly true, therefore, that we owe it to ourselves, but at least that all of us owe to some of us. The some of us who receive the interest are private investors seeking income that is exempt from other state income taxes. The large institutions such as banks, corporations, insurance companies, and investment funds with institutions, the money represents pooled assets to be belonging to thousands of small investors. So a major portion of the interest in the national debt does indeed accrue to the benefit of a large sector of the American people. That's the good news. The bad news is that the government obtains every cent of the money it pays to us by confiscating it from us in the first place. Abolish the 16th Amendment. Hashtag, if it is true that we owe it to ourselves, then it is also true that we pay it to ourselves. The money goes out of one pocket and into the other, minus a handling fee. The government takes $1,000 from us in taxes and the inflation and gives us back $350. The so-called benefit to the public is but a giant scam. And more bad news, when people purchase government bonds, there is less money available for investments in private industry. It is well known that the government credit crowds out private credit. The results are that the productive side of the nation is handicapped by unfair competition for investment capital. To obtain new money for growth, private companies must pay a higher interest rate. These are passed through to the consumer in the form of higher prices. We're seeing that with everything right now, by the way. Many companies are forced to curtail their plans for expansion, and potentially new jobs are never created. Some companies are forced out of business altogether and their employees are put out of work. The economy is always retarded by the government debt. The larger the debt, the greater the damage. The 12% portion of the national debt held by foreign investors may not seem like a large percentage, but it represents a huge amount of money nevertheless. $500 billion cannot be ignored. These bonds could become a great problem down the line as they mature. So far, they have been a partial blessing because they were purchased with money that already existed. Therefore, they were not inflationary. But it is not difficult to imagine future conditions under which the bondholders would decide not to renew. In order to pay off those bonds on maturity, the Treasury would have to issue new ones. The Federal Reserve then would have to purchase the new bonds with fiat money. Therefore, foreign-held federal debt is a ticking time bomb if it should ever have to be picked up by the Fed. The inflationary impact on our country would be staggering. So this is all very interesting, but I'm going to skip forward through. He has a bit in here about the New World Order. And I want to skip it, but I'm going to have to do it. None of this is happening by accident. Chapters 5 and 6 documented the currently unfolding plan to create a functioning world government within the frameworks of the United Nations, often referred to as the New World Order. The proposed global government is designed upon the principles of socialism. It is the dream come true for the world's socialist theoreticians, politicians, and technicians who see it as the ultimate laboratory for their social experiments upon mankind. There are two weapons of control now being readied at the UN. One is a world military command, which will eventually control all national armies, and super weapons. That is being accomplished under the slogans of peace and disarmament. The other is a World Central Bank, now called the IMF, World Bank, with the ability to issue a common money, which of all nations must accept. That is being accomplished under the slogans of international trade and economic growth. Of the two weapons, monetary control is the most important. The use of military force is viewed as a crude weapon in the arsenal of the world government, to be used only as a last resort. The effects of monetary control are more powerful than megatons of atomic energy. It reaches into every shop and every home, a feat that could never be accomplished by standing armies. It can be used with precision against one nation, one group, or even one person, while sparing and benefiting all others. Military forces may be irresistible, but it causes resentment and political unrest and can smolder for decades. Since monetary manipulation is seldom understood by its victims, it does not incur their wrath. In fact, the manipulators enjoy high social status and financial reward. For these reasons, monetary control is the weapon of choice for the New World Order. And remember, the Fed's fighting gallantly against inflation for all of us right now. A future world parliament based on the concept of minimum coercion and maximum freedom could be a wonderful advent for mankind. Without trying to cram all nations into a centrally directed beehive, it would welcome cultural and religious variety. Instead of trying to place the world into a collectivist straitjacket of rules, regulations, quotas, and subsidies, it would encourage diversity, the freedom to choose, instead of levying ever larger taxes on every conceivable economic activity and destroying human incentive in the process. It would encourage member nations to reduce the taxes that already exist and thereby stimulate production and creativity. A world parliament dedicated to the concept of freedom would have to withhold membership from any government that violated the basic rights of its citizens. It could be the means by which the totalitarian governments would be encouraged to abandon their oppressive policies in order to obtain the economic and political advantages of acceptance in the world body. It could become the greatest force for peace and prosperity and freedom we've ever known. But the New World Order that is now incubating at the United Nations is an entirely different creature. Its membership represent just about every dictator and warlord in the world. Its philosophy is built upon the socialist doctrine that all good flows from the state. Those who do not conform must be bent to the government's will or be eliminated. It cannot oppose totalitarianism for the simple reason that it is totalitarianism. America is the target. The New World Order cannot become a functional reality so long as the United States remains able to go it alone. America is viewed as a potential bull in the china shop. Right now it is safely under control. The world planners are worried it might break loose in the future. If the American people were to awaken to realities of world politics and regain control over their government, they still would have the military and economic power to break away. Among the world planners, therefore, it has become the prime directive. What never to interfere is the prime directive. What is this? This prime directive is to weaken the United States both militarily and economically. Well, how about socially and culturally? How about the morality of the United States? It's all under assault. It's rant over. And the directives have come from the American leaders, not those other countries. CFR members sitting in the White House, the State Department, the Defense Department, and the Treasury are now working to finalize that part of the plan. It is yet one more doomsday mechanism that once it gains the sufficient momentum, We'll pass the critical point of no return. Look out your window. We just crossed it. The Korean War was the first time American soldiers fought under UN authority. That trend has accelerated and now includes military actions in Iraq, Yugoslavia, Bosnia, and Haiti. By the time this book gets to print, there undoubtedly will be many more. While the American military is being absorbed into the UN, steps are also underway to hand over American atomic weapons. When that happens, a doomsday mechanism will be activated. It will be too late to escape. Likewise, the IMF World Bank is already functioning in conjunction with the Federal Reserve as a world central bank. The American economy is being deliberately exhausted through foreign giveaways and domestic boondoggles. The bridges to nowhere. The object is not to help those in need or to preserve the environment, but to bring the system down. When once proud and independent Americans are standing in soup lines, they will be ready to accept the carefully arranged rescue by the World Bank. The world currency is already designed. It's waiting only for the appropriate crisis to justify its introduction. From that to there will be no escape. All right, skipping ahead. The report then we're jumping in the middle of him talking about this report. It's a new definition of peace. The report then explains that we are approaching a point in history where the old formulas may not work. Why? Because it may now be possible to create the world government in which all nations will be disarmed and disciplined by a world army. A condition which will be called peace. The report says the word peace, as we will have to use it in the following pages, implies total and general disarmament. Under the scenario, independent nations will no longer exist and governments will not have the capacity to wage war. There could be military actions by the World Army against renegade political subdivisions, but this would be called peacekeeping operations, and soldiers would be called peacekeepers, the blue helmets, they call them. Now, no matter how much property is destroyed or how much blood is spilled, the bullets will be peaceful bullets, and the bombs, even the atomic bomb, if necessary, will be peaceful bombs. The report then raises the question of whether there can ever be a suitable substitute for war. What else could the regional governments use, and what could the world government itself use to legitimize and perpetuate themselves? To provide an answer to that question was the main purpose of the study. The report from the Iron Mountain concludes that there can be no substitute for war unless it possesses three properties. It must, 1, be economically wasteful. 2, represent a credible threat of great magnitude. And 3, provide a logical excuse for compulsory service into the government. Have we figured it out yet? Do you have any ideas what it could be? The subject of compulsory service, the report explains that one of the advantages of standing armies is that they provide places for the government to put antisocial and dissident elements of society. The absence of war, these forced labor battalions would be told they're fighting poverty or cleaning up the planet or bolstering the economic or serving the common good in some other fashion. Every teenager would be required to serve, especially during those years in which young people are the most rebellious against authority. I'm skipping. I don't like this. Fine. I am skipping ahead. Why? Because I don't think everyone should have to join the army or be in service. Like the Israelis, every kid has to do 2 years, I think. And don't get me wrong, I really in my younger days I spent a lot of time on the chicks of the Israeli Defense Force.com or whatever it was. But yeah, I don't feel this is I'm just skipping it. In the time of war, most citizens unaccompaniedly accept their low quality of life and remain fiercely loyal to their leaders. If a sustainable substitute for war is to be found, then it must also elicit that same reaction. Therefore, a new enemy must be found that threatens the entire world. The prospects of being overcome by that enemy must be just as terrifying as war itself. The report is emphatic on that point. The report reads, allegiance requires a cause. A cause requires an enemy. This much is obvious. The critical point is that that enemy that defines the cause must seem genuinely formidable. Roughly speaking, the presumed power of the enemy sufficient to warrant an individual sense of allegiance to a society must be proportionate to the size and complexity of that society. Today, of course, that power must be one of unprecedented magnitude in frightfulness. The first consideration in finding a suitable threat, have you guys figured it out yet? Threat to serve as a global enemy was that it did not have to be real. A real one would be better, of course, but an invented one would work just as well, provided the masses could be convinced it was real. Is it aliens? Do you think it's aliens? Is it Project Bluebeam? The public will more readily believe some fictions than others. Credibility would be more important than truth. Is it the war on drugs? Is it the war on poverty? Is it the war on men? The war on Christmas? What is it? Poverty was examined as a potential global enemy, but rejected as not fearful enough. Most of the world was already in poverty. I was in poverty. Only those who had ever experienced poverty would see it as a global threat. For the rest, it was simply a fact of everyday life. The invasions of aliens from outer space was given serious consideration. That report said that experiments along those lines already may have been tried. The public reaction, however, was not sufficiently predictable because the threat was not credible. Here is what the report had to say. So now let's look back over the last couple of years with the Tic Tac incident and the Nimitz incident and the government basically coming out and saying, yo, we actually have crash landed material. And it's hilarious because no one gave a fuck. Like, it wasn't even like the headline in the news. Credibility, in fact, lies at the heart of the problem of developing a political substitute for war. This is where the space race proposals, in many ways well suited as economic substitutes for war, fall short. The most ambitious and unrealistic space project cannot of itself generate a believable external menace. It has been hotly argued that such a menace would offer the last best hope of peace, etc., by uniting mankind against the danger of destruction by creatures from other planets or from outer space. Experiments have been proposed to test the credibility of an out-of-our-world invasion threat. That is possible that a few of the more difficult to explain flying saucer incidents of recent years were in fact early experiments to this kind, and if so, they would hardly have been judged encouraging. This report was released in 1966 when the idea of alien presence seemed far-fetched and the average person in the ensuing years. However, the perception has changed. The majority of the population now believes that intelligent life exists beyond our planet, and that some of those life forms may be monitoring our civilization. If a dramatic encounter should suddenly prove that the alien presence is real after all, we may be faced with the scenario of all nations being stampeded into world government, supposedly to defend the Earth from invasion. If the aliens do not show hostile intent, this alternative scenario would be a form of world government to represent a unified species and to speak with a single voice in some kind of galactic federation. Either scenario would be far more credible today than in 1966 and even more credible today, sir, than in 1995. This reminds me of Reagan Reagan said this a few times in like big speeches where he's like, if the Martians just came down and fucked shit up, like all of our problems would go away. Like we'd be ready to roll. Whatever he would say. All of the petty differences would go away, and a feeling of camaraderie would fill that void. This is what that fucking, what was it? Was it Roland Emmerich? The Independence Day with Will Smith fist fighting the alien, beating the alien up with one punch. The fucking Fresh Prince of Bel-Air fist fighting an alien in a plane crash. Maybe Chris Rock is actually an alien. Wah, wah, wah. All right, let's get it out into the open. I'm sure we've all figured it out by now. You guys are smarter than I am. The environmental pollution model. The final candidate for a useful global threat was the pollution of the environment. This was viewed as the most likely to succeed because it could be related to observable conditions such as smog and water pollution. In other words, it could be based partly on fact and therefore be credible. Also, predictions could be made showing the end of Earth scenarios such as horrible atomic warfare. Accuracy in these predictions would not be important. Their purpose would be only to frighten, not inform. And how dare you? It might even be necessary to deliberately poison the environment to make the predictions seem more convincing. In this fashion, it would be possible to focus the public mind on fighting a new enemy, more fearful and cruelly than any invader from another nation or even from outer space. The masses would be more willing to accept the failing standard of living tax increases and the bureaucratic intervention in their lives, simply the price we must pay to save Mother Earth. If a vision of death and destruction from pollution could be implanted into the public subconscious mind, then the global battle against it indeed replace war as the mechanism for control. Did the report from Iron Mountain really say that? It certainly did, and much more. Here are just a few of the pertinent passages. Here's the passages. When it comes to postulating a credible substitute for war, the alternate enemy must imply a much more immediate, tangible, and directly felt threat of destruction. It must justify the need for taking and paying a blood price in wide areas of human concern. In this respect, the possible substitute enemies noted earlier would be insufficient. One exception might be the environmental pollution model. If the danger of the society it posed was genuinely imminent, the fictive models would have to carry the weight of the extraordinary conviction underscored with not that inconsiderable actual sacrifice of life. Enter Al Gore's hockey stick here. It may be, for instance, that gross population of the environment can eventually replace the possibility of mass destruction by nuclear weapons as a principal apparent threat to the survival of the species, poisoning the air. How dare you? And the principal sources of food and water supply is already well advanced, and the first glance would seem promising in this respect. It constitutes the threat that can be dealt with only through social organization and political power. It is true that the rate of pollution could be increased selectively for this purpose, but the pollution problem has been so widely publicized in recent years that it seems highly improbable that a program of deliberate environmental poisoning could have been implemented in a politically acceptable manner. However unlikely some of the possible alternative enemies we have mentioned, we must emphasize that one must be found of credible quality and magnitude if a transition to peace is ever to come without social disintegration. It is more probable in our judgment that such a threat will have to be invented. Skipping ahead, environmentalism, a substitute for war. How dare you! It is beyond the scope of the study to prove that currently accepted predictions of environmental doom have been based upon exaggerated and fraudulent scientific studies, but such proof is easily found if one is willing to look objectively in the raw data and the assumptions upon which the projections are based. The more important, however, is the scientific question of why end-of-the-world scenarios based on phony scientific studies or no studies at all are uncritically publicized by the CFR-controlled media, or why radical environmental groups advocating socialist doctrine and anti-business programs are lavishly funded by CFR-dominated foundations, banks, and corporations, the very groups that would appear to have the most to lose. The report from the Iron Mountain answers these questions. As the report pointed out, truth is not important in these matters. It is what people can be made to believe that counts. Credibility is the key, not reality. And here's Bill Gates to talk to you about vaccinations. There's just enough truth in the fact of environmental pollution to make predictions of planetary doom. In the year 2000, something seemed believable and required its media corporation and reputation. The plan has apparently worked. People of the industrialized nations have been subjected to a barrage of documentaries, dramas, ballads, poems, bumper stickers, posters, marches, speeches, seminars, conferences, and concerts. Movies, YouTube channels. The result has been phenomenal. Politicians are now elected into office on platforms consisting of nothing more than expressed concern for the environment and a promise to clamp down on those nasty industries. No one questions the damages done to the economy of the nation. It makes no difference when the very planet on which we live is sick and dying. Not one in 1,000 will question the underlying premise. How could it be false? Look at all these movie stars, and look at all these rock stars who have joined the movement. I mean, this is like ripped from the head. This is Law and Order, bro. This is ripped from the headlines. Dun dun. The Green New Deal. What's going on with Biden and the gas companies? What's going on with Biden and the pipelines? What's going on with ESG scores and creditors? It's chilling that this guy saw this coming from so far away. And I mean, he's not the only one. Mr. Limbaugh would talk about this kind of stuff. So it's crazy reading this so far removed, because it was written in this sweet spot, right? In the 90s. But he's looking and he's like, this is what's going to happen. And it's fucking happening right now. The Green New Deal, it's fucking happening right now. They're getting rid of our cars, people. We need to pay attention. Well, the followers of the environmental movement are preoccupied with visions of planetary doom, like their leader, Greta Thunberg. How dare you? Let us see what the leaders are thinking. The first Earth Day was proclaimed in April 22nd of 1970 at a summit meeting in Rio de Janeiro, attended by environmentalists and politicians from all over the world. A publication widely circulated at that meeting was entitled The Environmental Handbook. The main theme of the book was summarized by a quotation from Princeton professor Richard A. Falk, a member of the CFR. Falk wrote that there are 4 interconnected threats to the planet: wars of mass destruction, overpopulation, pollution, and the depletion of resources. And he said the basis of all 4 of these problems is the inadequacy of the sovereign states to manage the affairs of mankind in the 20th century. The handbook continued at the CFR line by asking these rhetorical questions. Are nation states actually feasible now that they have the power to destroy each other in a single afternoon? What price would most people be willing to pay for a more durable kind of human organization, like Logan's Run? That seemed really great. More taxes. Giving up national flags. Perhaps the sacrifice of some of our hard-won liberties. In 1989, the CFR-owned Washington Post published an article written by CFR member George Keenan, in which he said, "We must prepare instead for an age where the great enemy is not the Soviet Union, but the rapid deterioration of our planet as a supporting structure for civilized life." I am on board. This is where I am right now. Just look at Twitter, look at Facebook. How do you not see rapid deterioration? Anyhow, the March 27, 1990, in the CFR-controlled New York Times, CFR member Michael Oppenheimer wrote, "The global warming, ozone depletion, deforestation, and overpopulation are the 4 horsemen of a looming 21st century apocalypse. As the Cold War recedes, the environment is becoming the #1 international security concern." CFR member Lester Brown heads up another think tank called World Watch Institute. The Institute's annual report entitled The State of the World 1991. Brown said that the battle to save the planet will replace the battle over ideology as the organizing theme of the new world. I don't think so. Maybe from his point of view, but environmentalism has become its own ideology. Fuck, the left has become its own ideology. Actually, its own theology. Like, it's a religious movement at this point. And everyone's taken all these leaps of faith with us in petroleum and wind power and solar power. Like, it's pretty amazing. And I've got to tell you, man, this year I've really kind of slid into the deep end of being paranoid. I think I might do a bonus episode soon and just kind of talk about, well, not what happened to me. That's not the right way to say it. I'll say it. So what happened to me? Because I've become like a full-blown prepper. I've never thought that it would come to this. But I don't know. I'm recording this too late. I had to assemble a bunch of patio furniture this evening. So I started after my traditional recording time. And maybe my weapons of mass destruction are piling up on me. Anyhow, how dare you? In the official publication of the 1992 Earth Summit, we find this: the world community now faces tougher, greater risks to our common security through our impacts on the environment than from traditional military conflicts with one another. How many times does it have to be explained the environmental movement was created by the CFR? It is a substitute for a war they hope will become the emotional and psychological foundation of the world government. And this is going to be, I could go on. There's still plenty to do, but I'm going to end here because he's been flashing his gang signs, right? He's been talking, and his mouthpieces have been talking about an environmental state of emergency. And if he does that, he's going to be able to roll out a bunch of emergency orders, and who knows what the shit he's going to do. He was in Saudi Arabia a couple of days ago, I think, begging the Arabs to drill more and sell us more oil, as he's not letting anyone drill here. I know everyone's like, they have licenses. They have licenses. But you have a license in my fucking front yard. There's no oil there. What are you even talking about? Once you get a license, you have to do all these permits to drill. And then once you drill to explore, then you have to file for permission to extract. So just having a license doesn't mean you can go like fucking Jeb what's-his-face, Texas Tea, and all that. And plus, everyone's talking about converting all these cars and how the oil industry is going to be gone by 2023 or whatever it is, 2033. And who's investing in these businesses that people are destroying? It's like, wake up. I'm John. This is the Abracast. Go to abracast.com. I'm sorry if I was kind of all over the place this evening. I think I already explained the patio furniture situation. I'll let Hilla wrap it up. Enjoy Juneteenth, everybody.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books. Take control of your destiny. Understand your past. Put your present in context and know your future with a twist. Check out the Abracast Tarot card deck. Your body is your temple. So let's make sure you got a badass t-shirt on it. Variety of cool occult themed t-shirts. And other merch like stickers, wall art, mugs, and more. Welcome to the Red Archive. Get access to over 50 hours of archived episodes. More bonus audio. Additional exclusive content. All this for only $1 a month. Are you interested in the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence? Learn more at Abracast.com.